Oh my God, I got a guy on my channel that got books behind him. He got papers all on the shelf. He look like he reading and writing and he ready to go on the Strong Inspirations channel where we give it to you straight, no chaser. I'm telling you, and I say is a funny saying. And let me tell you, my friends, I don't really mean alcohol, but it has got an alcohol connotation. I'm not no big drinker, so don't get it twisted. And one day y'all gonna hear about me in the news. Oh, my man then had a DUI. I'm not no big drinker. But when I say straight no chaser, y'all understand what I mean. I'm really kind of giving it to you in a light way that it's just straight good stuff. I don't put nothing to it. I let them do the talking, and that's what we're gonna do again today. Man, this guy is thorough. He was on the channel 15 minutes before we were supposed to start. I signed on there. He is smiling, saying, let's go. I said, man, I thought it was at a certain time. He said it is. I'm so excited. I'm ready to get it on when you are. And so I really appreciate that kind of enthusiasm for Strong Inspirations. And I know you, my viewers, you enthusiastic too. You watching it, you know what we're doing. You gotta like what we're doing because I like it. It's good stuff, you know. So come on, hit that subscribe button. It's free. What's holding you up? Hit the like button on this video because I'm telling you, he got books all behind him and everything, so you know what he's talking about. You're gonna like this video a lot. Hit that notifications bell so you get a ding or something like that when I put new videos. And I'm doing 4 or 5 videos a week. I just don't know when I'm putting them up. I got to put a little edit on them sometimes, you know, whatever reason or something like that happens. And then I'm ready to go. I don't need to keep it. I don't need to tell you every Monday or nothing. It could be a Saturday night when I put a video up. Just be ready, folks. And tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. I'm telling you, don't keep this to yourself. This is not no discount clothing store where you getting all your fashions and you don't want nobody to know where you getting your clothes. Tell them young kids about this. Have them watch it. Y'all talk about we don't know enough of our history. Here it is in your face and it's free. I love doing this. And let me tell you, I really would ask if you watch my movie, Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America. It's only 75 minutes long. So before you fall asleep, it's over. And you're not going to fall asleep because you're going to be like, wow, I didn't know that. I know you're going, because when I didn't know it when I was doing it. Man, I didn't know slaves bought their freedom. I didn't know that information. All that's in this movie, all right? This is the DVD. That's even what it looked like on the inside. I want to let you know there's a DVD in there. And but if you don't have a DVD player, it's streaming on Amazon. So, you know, you can get it and watch it there. I wrote a book. I follow through on what I try to do. I ain't gonna lie to you. I've been doing this a long time. And now there's the book. It's called Black Business Book. It's got over 200 facts. It starts at 1619 when the first Africans came here on that boat. And I tell you the truth, they didn't land in Georgetown. They landed near Hampton. I got a lady on the chapter on the video that tells us that. But it starts there and it ends with Motown Records because I go to 1960 and Motown was founded in 59. But it's everything in between there. And I don't give you no commentary. I just give you the facts. So it stands by itself. And because you're going to be so amazed and you want to learn more, in the back of the book is a reference section. I number the facts and then you correspond that to the reference section so you know where I found it. I didn't make this up. This is too good stuff. And I didn't make it up. So it's called Black Business Book, and that's also available on Amazon. But, you know, if you know what I'm about to tell you, if you want to cut the big Amazon man out, just go to my website, businessintheblack.net, and you can buy the book and the movie directly from there. and I truly appreciate the support. All right. But without further ado, I ain't gonna hold this guy no longer because he probably he been signed on for a while. I can't imagine. I can feel it. He say he's ready to go. Let's get it on. Sir, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's make it happen.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen McBride, and I'm a historical archaeologist. And what today I'm going to talk about is Camp Nelson, which used to be a county park in Jessamine County, Kentucky. It's still there, but now it's a national monument. The National Park Service has taken it over. And I worked there for a number of years as an archaeologist and then as director of interpretation to try to tell the story of this camp, which started out as a Union supply depot in the Civil War and later became Kentucky's largest recruitment and training center for African American soldiers.
Have you ever found anything that was pretty kind of earth-shattering?
I don't know about earth-shattering, but you know, we found things that are, you know, pretty important in terms of telling the story of the people that were there, which is what we're interested in as archaeologists. We're not so much interested in individual items or what people might call, you know, valuable items or treasure. We're interested in putting together the artifacts to tell the story of the people that lived there.
I got you.
A nice thing about Camp Nelson, because it was a military site, the Army kept pretty detailed records, much more so than you'd get on a civilian site.
Let's go back to now the site that you worked on is in what, the camp you worked on is in what city? Where is it located? That kind of thing.
It's in Jessamine County, Kentucky, about 6 miles south of the county seat, which is Nicholasville, and about 18 or 20 miles south of Lexington, Kentucky,
okay,
which is the closest large city.
Okay.
And it's along the Kentucky River, a bend in the Kentucky River.
Okay.
And it's on what's a pretty good major highway today called US 27.
Okay.
So if you go south of Lexington or south of Nicholasville on US 27, you'll drive past it.
Okay. And so start us at the beginning. What is it, the site?
Well, it started out as a supply depot that was built specifically to supply the campaign to Knoxville, Tennessee, which the U.S. Army had planned. Their commander was named Major General Ambrose Burnside, and he had just recently left the Virginia theater and moved over to the Ohio River kind of theater. And the camp started in the summer of 1863.
For the Confederate or for the Union?
It was for the Union, and it's a U.S. Army. Kentucky was a loyal Union state, though slavery was still legal there.
Sometimes, oh my God, I didn't know that was a dynamic.
Yeah, there were a number of states, Kentucky and Missouri and Maryland and Delaware, that slavery was still legal, but they did not secede and join the Confederacy.
I got you.
So they were still Union states, but slavery was legal. And then before Camp Nelson was founded, the Emancipation Proclamation was made law in January 1st, 1863, which emancipated enslaved people in the states in rebellion, the Confederate states, but it did not emancipate people in these quote unquote border states like Kentucky. So slavery was still legal, even though, you know, we were in the moving into the second year of the war.
So let me try to understand this. You got a camp there that's fighting against slavery in the city where slavery was legal.
Correct.
My God, I mean, so Did the camp want to win or lose? That's the funny dynamic, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's a funny dynamic with the Civil War because it started in 1861 from the Union side as a war to preserve the Union in 1861.
Right.
The Confederate States wanted to separate from the Union and form their own country and preserve slavery in their country. But initially, the Union side really didn't bring up slavery too much. They were afraid these border states would secede. They were trying to slow down the secession. And they also were afraid there, were a lot of white people in the North that wouldn't fight and die to destroy slavery, but they would to preserve the Union. So they kept it as preserving the Union. And then the Emancipation Proclamation changed that. It became a war to both preserve the Union and destroy slavery.
And this, I got you. I got to think this through. Okay, I'm at a camp.
Don't get a headache. Don't explode.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. There's a camp in the southern part. So let's say if the camp wins, then slavery goes away.
Right.
But we are and we want that to be the case. Only if nothing else, so that we don't secede from the Union.
With that, particularly with these border states, they were afraid, and Kentucky was a large state population-wise in that time, and it also was right on the Ohio River, and they didn't want, the Confederacy to be all the way up on the Ohio River, so they were real careful. And Lincoln had a quote, I can't remember it exactly, of, he'll preserve the Union with slavery, he'll preserve the Union without slavery. He was very pragmatic at the early parts of the war.
I got you.
But then later he was waiting for a victory in the field, a military victory, to give him the power to go ahead with the Emancipation Proclamation, because he had been thinking about doing that, but needed the right moment. And then after the Union victory at the Battle of Antietam in Maryland, he released a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation in late 1862. And then it became law in January 1, 1863.
I got you. Let me ask you this now. What my question was, how many people were housed at the camp that you worked at? How big was it? How effective was it? Was it one of the larger ones, the smaller ones, whatever?
It was probably it was one of the largest, I would say, rural depots, but it was probably more middle-sized when compared to urban depots like in Louisville or Nashville or around Washington, D.C. It had anywhere from, depending on the time of war, 2,000 to 8,000 soldiers there, and 1,000 to 2,000 civilian employees there. And then later, it had upwards of 3,000 African-American refugees who were women and children who were escaping slavery and came into camp.
Is it
so? It was pretty good sized town for the 1860s. They covered about 4,000 acres.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And it had over 300 permanent buildings.
Okay.
And an unknown number of tents.
Okay.
Probably 10,000 tents. I don't know.
Does it look like a fort where there's a big wall or fence going around it or something?
They built fortifications around it. But they would be earthworks. And what it was a series of large earthen forts that were connected by infantry entrenchment. which would be a trench with a mound of dirt in front of it. So that would have covered the vulnerable parts of the camp. So it was a fortified camp, but it didn't have like a stone wall or a wooden wall. It had, in the Civil War, field fortifications were earthworks that were braced with wood or stone or sand, what we call sandbags now.
Okay.
And that was because the artillery was powerful enough that it would knock down most stone or wooden or walls that were, more popular in earlier wars. But with rifled artillery, earth would absorb artillery better. So yes, but it was fortified. Yeah.
How long would you say it might have taken to build this camp? That's a pretty large size, a lot of buildings and whatnot.
It was ongoing, but I'd say that a lot of it was built in about 3 or 4 months.
Really?
But yeah. But more buildings were built later, and the forts had to be, repaired all the time because of erosion or rotting wood. One of the ironies of the camp was that when it was initially constructed in 63, about half the labor to build it were enslaved people. And the Army, they hired white employees, and they also hired free blacks. But they would also go to farms and they would impress, what they call impress, the enslaved people, primarily men, and they would pay like rent to the owners to use those men as labor. From the records, it looks like they would send them back to the farms like at planting time or harvest time, but then they would keep them there other times and have them work primarily as manual labor, building the forts or repairing or building roads or this kind of thing. And a lot of these men later joined the Army, which I'll get to in a second, when the Army first started enlisting African Americans in Kentucky.
Okay, before we get there, I want to still get a little more idea. Okay, so the Civil War begins in 61.
Right.
And then the general says, okay, now we got these strategic locations. We need to build camps so that we can get supplies to our troops.
Right.
So then he says in 63, one of the locations is where you are.
Right.
Then they go down, they scout, they find these 4,000 acres. This is a good spot because some of it can be fortified with the river.
Right, you're very insightful.
Yeah.
There's two reasons that they chose this. Well, maybe 3 reasons. One, it was easily defendable, like you say, and it was because it was surrounded by water on 3 sides.
Okay.
So the only part that was really exposed where the main fortification line was, where there wasn't water. There was a Kentucky River on 2 sides, the west and the south, and Hickman Creek on the other side.
Okay.
And these streams were really deeply entrenched. There was limestone cliffs on the Kentucky River that were over 400 feet high.
Okay.
And on Hickman Creek side, about 200 feet side. So it was difficult to get up there. The other reasons that it was chosen was it was on a major road, US 27, which was called the Lexington-Danville Turnpike.
Okay.
And that road would take them all the way down into Tennessee. And the other reason was the Kentucky River itself, which was used to ship supplies down on riverboats from Cincinnati. Or one of the negative aspects about this location was that there was no railroad. The railroad went down to Nicholasville, 6 miles north, but it did not go south towards Knoxville. So they had to ship goods, if they weren't on the riverboat, on wagons from or on the backs of mules from Nicholasville down to Camp Nelson, where they were stored in 22 large warehouses. And then they really established a hierarchy of supply depots. We were like the head one. And then there were little teeny depots all along. So there was, as the troops went down towards Knoxville, they could get supplies from other smaller depots
Okay.
as they went along, particularly Crab Orchard or the Cumberland Gap. Some troops went over the Cumberland Gap because that was the last bastion of Confederate occupation in Kentucky. Most of Kentucky had been abandoned by the Confederacy by that time. But so they recaptured.
What when you say supplies, what type of supplies are they? I mean, is this ammunition? This is guns. This is uniforms. What supplies are they?
Well, it would mostly be food for people and food for the horses and mules, and then ammunition, and then various sundries. You know, the ammunition would be, bullets, but also powder. Some were in, mostly they were in cartridges by that time. So they would have small arms ammunition and artillery ammunition. They would also carry, if they were bringing larger tents, they would carry those in wagons. Soldiers would carry what they called half a shelter tent, and they put two of them together, and two men would sleep together. So an individual soldier would carry his rifle, would have his clothes on, his shoes on, and then would have a haversack with I don't know, a few days worth of food. He would have a knapsack with his bedding, maybe extra socks, some personal goods. He would have a cartridge box with cartridges, a certain number of cartridges with him. And then he would have a cap box with the percussion caps in it. So he would be pretty well loaded down.
Okay.
If they were on a long march and there were wagons, they might have an opportunity to put their knapsacks in a wagon, but oftentimes they just carried them themselves. And,
okay. Did the Confederate have camps like this too?
Yeah, they did. They did. Not as many or as large, but yeah, they had the same kind of thing. They'd have to store supplies, usually near urban areas or near the railroad, that because you really couldn't carry everything with you. And if you were on a large campaign, you would have to bring supplies with you, but then you'd need to get resupplied later. So the wagons or mule trains or railroad cars, if you were lucky enough to be near a railroad, would be constantly going back and forth. If you were, say out campaigning for a number of months, you couldn't really carry enough food and ammunition with you. So yeah, you had to have, this is called kind of the logistics of war, but it was it was very complicated.
Yeah. And I guess when as you tell this story, what comes to my mind is this was not just no run-of-the-mill war. This was a full-fledged battles within America, for this as it was. But at the camp, just as a jokey type thing, was there a bar there that when you got there at the end of the day, was there a restaurant or something like that that made it kind of okay?
Right. There were the stores and restaurants and bars that the Army allowed private vendors to set up. And there were Army merchants that were called sutlers, which is a Dutch word. They would even follow the Army around and set up a store at their temporary camp. But at
Really?
Camp Nelson, there were permanent settlers. There were permanent what they called eating houses. There were permanent what they called taverns. And the settlers would also dispense food and beverages. The food was usually canned food like sardines or canned smoked oysters. And then they would have various beverages. And the Army would regulate the sale of alcoholic beverages to enlisted men. But, you know, the enlisted men found their way around that.
Yeah, so they at the end of a whatever, before they go out, they could go get drunk, let's say, at the
Well,
bar.
they could, but if they really got, they could go and have a drink or two. But if they got drunk, they probably ended up in the stockade. Uh, if their sergeants and officers were watching them.
Yeah, I got you.
But yeah, they could go if they had money, and they got paid irregularly, and the stores would give them tokens, uh, and probably a lot of them were in debt to the stores for quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
It would basically give them a loan, and or if you had money, you would buy a certain number of tokens, and then you pay for your if you wanted a new pair of socks or you wanted a hair comb or
Yeah.
a harmonica or something like that, or a can of peaches,
Yeah.
because Army rations were pretty boring, and soldiers would oftentimes want to get something a little more interesting to eat
Oh, sure.
if they
Okay.
could afford it,
Okay.
or they
What
might
is
want to
there?
go get.
And one more question, I guess.
Uh,
The question's popping at me. Man, you're doing such a good job. Oh my God. Was there a battle, a big victory won, maybe Gettysburg, that the soldiers came from your camp?
um, Well, there were a number of, I would say, yeah, the battles of Knoxville, one, and then the whole, let's see, then the Atlanta campaign. So part of the Army of the Ohio that came out of Camp Nelson or was supplied by Camp Nelson was involved in the Atlanta campaign, which would have gone from Chattanooga down to Atlanta in 1864. And then after Atlanta, you know, Sherman did his march to the sea to Savannah, but our guys went back Nashville, but they were involved in the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee, and then the Battle of Nashville itself.
Okay.
And then they were also involved, not really large battles, but they were involved in some smaller battles in Southwest Virginia, the Battle of Saltville, Virginia, and the Battle of Marion, Virginia. And then two of our United States colored troop, as they were called at the time, regiments, the 114th and 116th, were involved in the sieges around Richmond, Virginia, and Petersburg, Virginia.
Mm.
And the 116th was involved in the breakthrough at Petersburg, which led General Lee's army in Northern Virginia to retreat to Appomattox Courthouse, where they surrendered. And the 116th was actually at Appomattox Courthouse.
Oh, what? How about this? Was there one that they lost? A battle? Because let me say this. From what I gather, and maybe you can correct me, the war really could have gone either way. The Confederates were winning battles.
Yeah, they will usually refer to Gettysburg as the turning point, which it was in the Eastern Theater, but in the Western Theater, which is mostly Tennessee, Kentucky, most of the battles were won by the Union Army. The exception of terms of large battles was Chickamauga, which the Confederates won, but then they didn't follow up with it, and they were defeated at Chattanooga, which led to the kind of movement towards Atlanta. But yeah, you're right. And in terms of our troops, there were, some small battles that they lost, and probably the most well known was the first Battle of Saltville, Virginia, in October 1864, which it was a campaign by Union troops, which include both black and white troops, that moved from Kentucky into Virginia to capture and destroy their salt works, which their main source of salt, and also some iron furnaces and other industry down there. And they were defeated at the first Battle of Saltville and had to retreat back. And Saltville is known because, like Fort Pillow in Tennessee, though it was smaller, there was what's called a massacre event in which Confederate soldiers murdered mostly black soldiers that were wounded on the field or who had surrendered, or even who were in hospital beds, were murdered. And their white officers were murdered as well.
Wow.
So that was a defeat. The Kentucky African American troops, the what they call commissioned officers, which would be lieutenants on up, were all white. The non-commissioned officers, sergeants and corporals, could be black, but there were some African American commissioned officers other places, but not the Kentucky troops.
Yeah.
So the regimental sergeant major was the highest rank African American, or a chaplain that an African American could be.
We're gonna close on the African American point, but let me ask you this: there were medical facilities at the camp too, wasn't there?
Yeah, we had a 700.
Send them back to the camp.
If they were in good enough shape, they would get back to the camp. There was a 700-bed hospital called Nelson General Hospital at Camp Nelson. It was, I guess, a state-of-the-art facility at that time.
Yeah.
And we know from records it had indoor hot and cold running water and indoor flush toilets, which was quite, in a steam laundry. But yeah, if they were only minorly wounded or sick, they could be taken back there. They would typically, in the Civil War, they would set up field hospitals.
Oh, okay.
And try to deal with wounds and the most serious injuries, patch them up at least so they could get them back to the better hospital. And obviously some didn't make it out of the field hospital, but the regiments would have their own surgeons with them on the march, so there would be medical personnel with them. And they would do the best they could given
because I heard that. I mean, even though the gun or the bullet didn't necessarily kill you, it maimed you so much that you would die or bleed out or something like that.
Right. They had heavy caliber lead bullets, so that would very much, because lead's so soft. Lead bullets were later banned from warfare.
Really?
But they would break up because they're so soft.
Yeah.
And they would, if they hit bone, they would shatter it into dozens of pieces, and the surgeons couldn't put them back together. So they would just amputate. And then you would get lead poisoning or gangrene if it wasn't watched carefully.
As we kind of come to a close, let's go on this the black soldiers thing. For a long time, they didn't want black soldiers.
No, they didn't.
And then they eventually did.
Right, they eventually did. They started some in South Carolina and Massachusetts and New Orleans and area in 1862. And then after the Emancipation Proclamation in 63, the federal government more actively recruited and enlisted African Americans and created the federal United States colored troops. And they started that in 63 in all the Union states except one, which was Kentucky. And the white leadership was resisting this because you couldn't be a soldier and an enslaved person at the same time.
Right.
So if you became a soldier, you had to be free, and they didn't want that. But finally, in 1864, the federal government started enlisting Black soldiers in Kentucky, initially with restrictions, only free Blacks and enslaved men with their owner's permission. That didn't work so well, as you
I
might
didn't think so.
imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, because
So,
I'm fighting to get you out, get you up over me.
but within about a month, they withdrew those restrictions, and there were literally a flood of men that came to enslaved men that came to join the army. And at Camp Nelson on one day, March 23rd, 1864, 250 men came into camp, and the army was not prepared to deal with them. They had set up this really complicated enlistment system, and so they just uh, had him in camp there while the officers figured out how to enlist him, which took them about a week. And finally, when they started enlisting them, there was about 400 or 500 there. And eventually, over 5,700 were enlisted at Camp Nelson. Over 10,000 were camped or trained there, and over 23,000 were enlisted in Kentucky, which makes it the second most of any state, even though it was the last one to start.
How many people?
Louisiana is the
How
largest.
many African American or Black soldiers would you say enlisted in general, in total?
I think, and I think there was about 180,000.
Okay, so that if you know this one, how about this? Out of how many Black people could have done it in the North, let's say?
I don't know that one, but I know in Kentucky that of the eligible men, over, I think 57 to 60% joined the army.
I got you. I like it. We got to fight for it. We can't just sit back and let this keep going.
Right, which is actually an incredible percentage.
Yeah, yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, but I'm sitting there, I'm enslaved and I'm free and my people, I'm going to fight for it because I think it's worth it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm going to close on this one. You made a comment earlier that at Antietam is where the Civil War ended.
Well, it was where Abraham Lincoln felt that the Union, the U.S. side, it didn't end, but there was a major victory for the Union. They hadn't had very many victories in the Eastern Theater, and he was waiting for a victory before he announced the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay.
So he needed a big victory politically to do that, and Antietam was it.
Okay.
Which I believe was in September of 1862. I could be wrong there.
Okay, how about we end on this one? So when the Civil War ends, what happens at the camp? All the people are throwing their hats up in the air.
Yeah.
Word has gotten out. The South has conceded.
Yeah. Let me back up for 1 second to add another part of the story is the women and children kept coming in. The army emancipated the men, but not the women and children, their wives and children. The army eventually threw them out of camp, but there was a big uproar, and on March 3rd, 1865, the U.S.
Hold on, stop me right there. This happened when?
March 3rd, 1865. The war was still going on, but not much longer. Congress emancipated the wives and children of the United States colored troops, which was the second death blow to slavery in Kentucky. So these women, more came into Camp Nelson. So at the end of the war, there were 3,000 women and children and thousands of soldiers. And when the war was over, I suspect, there were parties, there was excitement, but there was also uncertainty because was particularly with the African American people
Sure.
of what to do now.
Sure.
And this is one reason that the 13th Amendment was passed
Sure.
in December 1865 was to destroy slavery forever, because there
Sure.
was fear that maybe the Emancipation Proclamation was actually unconstitutional, and maybe the freeing of these men for joining the army was unconstitutional. There was fuzziness here. So by the December, slavery was destroyed, and that was the end of slavery in Kentucky. Was the 13th Amendment. It was still legal up to that point.
Okay.
But there was, and then gradually they shut down. The Army left Camp Nelson in 1866, but where the women and children lived, it became a community. During the war, it was called the Home for Colored Refugees. That was its official name. And after the war, it became a freedmen community that is still there to this day.
Oh, okay.
It's called the Hall community. And in between, it was called Ariel, and then it was referred to as Camp Nelson. And it had a strong connection with Berea College. Some of your viewers may have heard of Berea College.
Yeah, right.
Which was founded by an abolitionist, Reverend John D.C., who was at Camp Nelson ministering the refugees and the soldiers and setting up school for them. And so some of the people stayed, and then some of them left the state and many of them went to Ohio. Some migrated to urban areas. I'm talking about the African American families.
Sure.
And then some, went back to the farms where they grew up on and worked out an arrangement with their former owners. And then later, in about a decade later, many Kentucky African Americans got fed up with the lack of progress and migrated to Kansas. And Kentuckians founded the community of Nicodemus, Kansas. Some other African American communities.
Oh, I got you.
Land became available under the Homestead Act.
Yeah.
But usually the community leaders, in our case, it was Minister Gabriel Burdett, who led many people out to Kansas in 1877.
Okay, I got you. Boy, I tell you, you have given us a lesson today. I know I've learned a ton. I thank you so very much for coming on Strong Inspiration. Do you have a book or something like that?
Well, I have some articles and smaller booklets, and some of the booklets are available online. There's one called Seizing Freedom. Let me read the exact title. Seizing Freedom, Archaeology of Escaped Slaves at Camp Nelson, Kentucky. So
Is it on Amazon?
You can find that online.
Let
me read a quote for you before
please.
we leave. This is from an African American soldier. He says, "See how much better off we are now than we were 4 years ago. It used to be 500 miles to get to Canada from Lexington, but now it is only 18 miles. Camp Nelson is now our Canada."
Ooh, I got
meaning freedom.
Yes. Thank you so very much for being on the show. Everybody, I told you I got a heavyweight today. I told you, man, I wasn't lying. I ain't got a lot of you, all my viewers. He got all them books behind him, papers and stuff like that. He know what he talking about. He been doing it for a while, and he got one of them PhDs. Oh my God, I tell you, if you subscribe to the channel, like this video, tell somebody about Strong Inspirations, hit that notifications bell, go out, check out his book on Amazon. It's going to be in the description. Watch my movie, read my book. Everybody that's going to get educated more by watching strong inspirations. And so to you, my guests, I want to say to you in all sincerity, I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind, because we really appreciate what you're doing and educating us and keeping this history alive. We'd like to say bye-bye and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye and be safe, everyone.